Yeah, and
Cool. So,
so
um, I guess welcome back. Before we get going, Chris, who's online, had a really good question. Do you want to ask that question again, Chris, for the recording?
Um, yeah, I was just noticing that as we build these files, we're placing them in static, and then we do a collect, and the system copies them to static main. And the question is, why not just take out the middleman and just put it in static main?
Put it directly in there, and that's a totally valid question. Um, Really, the idea there is we could just put them directly in there and put all of our static files just in one place. But as the project grows, it's just the same reason that we want to refactor our CSS like we did last time out of the HTML file into a separate file to even be collected in static files. It's just easier to maintain and keep track of when you have things broken out into separate places. And what we're going to do today is we're going to write some JavaScript and put it into a static file that's inside of our to-do
Okay.
application. And so what it's going to do is as you add more applications and do more things, each of those applications can have their own set of static files that are specific. They can have like their own styles, their own specific scripts. And it's a way to keep things organized while you're working on it in development. And then what collect
Okay.
statics is doing is getting everything ready for deployment. And it has one single place that Django is going to look for all those static files when it serves them. Does that make
Now,
some sense?
the bit of playing around I did with, like I said, but I was doing this. I was doing it with Ruby.
Yeah.
There was a rake.
Uh-huh.
Used to do a rake, and
Okay.
that was basically a script that was executing a bunch of stuff in the background against your thing and cleaning everything up and making it just so for the page.
Sure.
They never really explain why. You're just supposed to, you've done this stuff and now you do a rake, and
Okay.
and is this kind of the background about what's really going on there, where it's
I
parsing it
suspect
out,
it's and
putting it in
yeah,
the way it wants it to see it, and
right.
and just taking you out of the picture, and it's just an automated script that's
Yeah,
taking your useful information and making something that the system can really use.
exactly. So what it's doing is it's kind of saving that time, right? To
Hmm.
where when you're in production, you don't want to have to go and traverse all the different file locations you could have your static files in. It just has it in one place, and it's easier to pull them up and quicker to serve them that way. So that's really all it's doing with collect static. I don't know that much about Ruby to say if it's anything like Rake, but yeah, it's somewhat similar in the fact that it's an automated process to move things where they need to be, right? I'm not sure if that's exactly the same as what Rake does, but that's what collect static is doing. Is just putting in one place so that in production, when things are being served, it has one location that needs to go to get all static files for the entire project. That's why
No,
it's
that's
also
just me.
important that you
It's me
name
picking
stuff.
on you because you'll
Yeah,
answer back. Yeah, that's the one thing
exactly.
a,
That's
a
the point of
YouTube
class. No, that's
video
what I
won't
appreciate,
do.
man. Like, again, the point of this class is to be able to talk about it specifically when you're like, why in the hell are we doing this? That's what I want to address because there are tons of great YouTube videos and stuff out there, but it's hard to get that when they explain something and you're like, but why do we do it that way? You get that answer that is a little bit tricky. So yeah, man, don't feel bad about asking questions. So that's entirely the point. But
That need for that why.
yeah, no, and
My
that's
brain
and that's
doesn't.
really what this whole course is supposed to be doing is layering in that why of what we're doing all the way around so that we have a full set of like whys that we're doing all this stuff. And today that question is very pertinent because we're going to do exactly that and show why collect static, like how it takes it from other places and puts it in one spot. And so yeah, I agree that when we have it in the same level of the directory, like we have our static folder and then our main static folder right next to each other, you're like, why in the hell am I doing this? I can just put it in that first one in the first
Yeah.
place. That's totally valid, man. And it really is just because as things grow, it's going to be a lot easier to maintain and keep track of if they have their own. Each application has its own thing, and we'll set one up for it today. So that's the main reason for it. But I mean, again, theoretically, you could just put everything directly in there and never run collect static.
So
Well,
is there a way to back it out because you've used it?
what do you mean collect static?
Yeah. Is there a way to uncollect? Like say you do
Yeah,
something and your page breaks, you go, ooh,
yeah, yeah.
something went right, and I can just reverse that collect and put it back to where it was before we started. I mean, is that part of the point?
Yeah, and it's really easy to do. I mean, the easiest thing to do is just delete the directories and files, just remove them, and it'll they won't be there anymore. So, like that's how doing like this course, right? We build incrementally each day, and I'll go through when I'm writing the documentation to make sure it works. I'll check it and run through each step, and then back it up to the starting point again for each day, so that we could build it together. And so that's exactly what I do. Like I'll run the collect static, and it moves everything into one place, and then I just remove those directories and it gets rid of it. So that's kind of like undoing it. It's a little bit of a less automated way, but you just use those Linux commands that we talked about before and just
Okay.
remove. You can remove all the directories in one command. It's pretty quick. But yeah, and that's also why we do it at this level to where you understand what these things are. They're just files in directories. So if something like you said goes wrong, works totally unexpectedly, you can all just delete that file, just get rid of it, and that's start over, put another file in there, and make it work the way you want it to. So it's a good question too, man. Cool. So let's let's dive in. I know you said you were a little bit behind with what you're doing, but the idea with those documents that I send out with the code examples is that this
Mhm.
should just take, I mean, roughly 20 minutes if you're just going through and just trying to catch up and just paste everything into where it needs to be. You just literally copy and paste those things. And when you really know what you're doing, it's like 5 minutes. But when if you're trying to read it and really kind of understand, it should be 20 minutes or less that you can go through everything. And there's full examples of each complete file that we do in that day at the bottom. So if you want to just do the entire thing and copy it all the way over just to get caught up to any particular point, then that's totally viable. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Um, and copy paste, we do that. I mean, I could even do it here if we wanted to. We just go on the day 8 thing and just copy it on over. But um, again, just to reiterate, the idea here is to make sure that you understand the mechanics of things and how they're working and where it's supposed to go. So if you don't write it all from scratch, you're not really missing anything. It's best to practice that way, but if you want to stay on it, to copy and paste is totally viable. All right, so welcome back, Chris. That showed up. Everybody else is watching on video. If you're behind a little bit and trying to catch up as well, stick with it. We are in week 4 of 6, so we're in the second part of our front end design and development. We're gonna do a little bit more development today, then design. Like design, I guess we kind of covered last time. Specifically on our day 8 out of the whole course, we're going to talk about front end frameworks and JavaScript specifically where it fits in. So we talked about how HTML is the layout of the page where things actually are. The CSS is going to be the styles, so colors, fonts, sizes, shapes, that kind of stuff will be in your CSS. JavaScript is going to make a site dynamic and interesting. So it's going to do things, take user inputs, take interactions, clicking on the screen, dragging, all that kind of stuff that makes a site not static is going to be your JavaScript. So we're going to do a little bit of that today, show where it's hooked up, write a little bit of JavaScript to kind of expose you to it and its syntax. It's not that complicated. Just if you've seen, well, we've seen Python. So it's got a lot more brackets and braces and things to miss in that regard, which is kind of annoying, but it's doing a lot of the same stuff. So the concepts that we've used in Python will be applied in a slightly different syntax in JavaScript, but it's not anything crazy, and we're not going to do anything really complicated. Um, and the reason that we like to talk about JavaScript specifically is that a lot of front end frameworks that you see out there, these are logos of front end frameworks. This is one of my favorite memes of all time with the astronaut looking at it saying, "Oh, it's all JavaScript." And the other one saying always has been, because it is. Everything in here, you'll see this A is Angular, and this little atom looking thing is React. This V is Vue. This little S thing is Svelte or Svelte. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. Just SVELTE. These are all front end frameworks. And so they help get things done faster, but they're just JavaScript for the majority of it. So if you know how to use JavaScript, you know how to read JavaScript, you can implement any of these front end frameworks into your project depending on your needs. So these are a little bit more complex than what we need for what we're doing. We're going to use a very, very, very simple framework that's older. It's one of the older frameworks out there, but it's still a viable option. There are still people using it, and there's no reason that you would avoid it for building especially simple projects when you're starting looking out. And it's called Bootstrap is the name of this one. So um, Bootstrap is it's free. It's you can grab it and use it. This was started by Twitter actually, which is kind of cool that they just put this out there and let everyone use it. But when you go to their site, you go to the get started thing, and this is linked in the day 8 documentation on how to get here. And we're gonna skip down to step number 2, and we're just gonna take these things and drop them in, and it's great. Once we do that, we'll be able to use all these components that are built into it. So we've been doing our backend stuff in Django as a framework. These front end frameworks are going to have all the bits and pieces that you might need to make your site look cool. So let me show you an example. So there's some layout stuff, there's some content, you have some forms that are built in there. The real fun stuff is down here in components. So let's say you want to do things that collapse with buttons. So you get this collapsing effect. This is the code that you would just copy and place into your code base that has the classes that we need in our HTML that make these things work like this. And instead of writing this yourself from scratch in CSS and JavaScript and all these things and making your own classes, you could just plug this in and use the different components however you like. So you could do really cool stuff like this off canvas one, have things slide in from the side. And let's do this with an href. So it slides in here on the right hand of the screen, and all these things that make a site not sit still are much faster to come in here and just take what's already been built in this framework and plug it into your site. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do today. Is we're going to take what we have here from this framework, and we're just going to plug it in, and then we're going to get to use it right away and make our site prettier. So before we get going, let's start the very first steps, which remember last time I forgot to do this first step and it bit me at the end. So let's start out by very first thing we always need to do is open and enter our development environment in the virtual environment. So we remember the name of it is my VMV. So we source my VM bin, and we're at the home directory here. And then activate, and that'll get us into our virtual environment. And then we want to move into our main top level project folder, where we can look at our tree structure again, just to remember what our file structure looks like right now. And again, I'm going to ignore all the stuff that we don't need. Take out my PyCache, the actual JavaScript folders, CSS folders, and image folders. Cool. So here's our, so I can zoom out just a little bit so it all fits on the page better. Our current file structure looks like this. So we have our manage.py file is where we are. Here's our top thing, our top my site directory with settings, not type site, sorry, the second level with our settings.py. Here's our static one where we did last time. We wrote some CSS in there. Here's our main static that we talked about and our to-do list. So we're going to spend a lot of time today, again, in our base.html, and we're going to do a lot of the changes in the HTML to plug in the framework and to write some JavaScript directly in there. And then we'll refactor the JavaScript to push it into our to-do application into a static folder there, because the JavaScript we're going to write today is going to be used later for helping us confirm that a user wants to delete a task. So we're going to use JavaScript to do that, because the way the Django deletes tasks, or deletes objects, and we get to this next week when we're doing database operations, you can hook it up to delete from the page, like a button that deletes, but it doesn't necessarily give you a warning or let you know that anything happened. It just deletes it really fast. So we're going to use JavaScript to give us that moment of pause to make sure we want to delete things, and we could set that up today before we even have our to-do list database going. We can set all that up since it's a front end thing and it's JavaScript that we do, but we're going to do that and put it into this directory. All right, so we've got into our project folder. We're ready to start working. As a reminder, our site currently looks like this. If you're following along before, it's pretty nasty looking. So we're gonna use Bootstrap to make it look better. You remember it has real simple functionality. We got a home page, an about page. They're both on this green background, and it's not dynamic. There's nothing interesting happening here. These are just two static pages with a link in between them. All right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into our files. We're gonna open up our base.html. So that's again in my site, templates, base.html. And this is how it should look from last time. So we've got our class directly on the body tag that is making that green background that we wrote in our CSS before and then moved over into the other place. And what we're going to do now is we're going to install and hook up the Bootstrap framework. And this is very simple. Again, we go to our quick start page. We skip down into step 2 because step 1 is create an HTML document. We already have one. So we're going to take two things out of this step 2 part. The first thing we're going to take is this link tag. And I'm going to copy the whole thing over, and then we'll kind of talk about what's in it. But we're going to take this link tag and notice that it's in the head element, right? Oh, it's in the head element. And so we're going to put it in likewise in our document in the head element. So it just needs to go anywhere above this closing tag, the head. So I'm going to paste that in. It's a little bit long. Just break down what this is. So it's got in this link tag, it starts out with our hyperlink reference, the href, just like we did before on our own link when we hooked up our main style sheet. This is telling us a location at a content delivery network, so CDN stands for, where this CSS file is located. So it's Bootstrap. Min means that it's minified, it's made smaller. So when we wrote our own CSS, it was on several lines so that we could read it. The computer reads it in one line, so it doesn't care about those carriage returns or anything. So when you minify something, it just stacks it up into one line, and it saves space that way. Remember, our understanding of how things are stored on a computer is taking up space and memory. This helps save some of that. But ultimately, it's just a CSS file. So it's the same thing that we did before. It's going to have class definitions. It's going to have all those sorts of things, and we could use those class definitions to change the look and feel and behavior of our site. So we need to tell it, like we did before, that the relation to this page is a style sheet so that it knows. This integrity tag is a hash. So it's a SHA-384. This isn't a cryptography class, so we're not going to talk about what those different things are. You might see this around, but this whole thing basically just says that it will not access this file if it's been changed since this integrity tag this hash was made. So it's just a kind of a security measure to make sure that things aren't malicious code isn't entered into that file and then accessed later. It's just a way to save that. In this cross origin equals anonymous attribute here is just a way for this information to be grabbed and put into the request and be trusted. So it's saying that the origin of this thing is the same as the origin of everything else is going. So when this information goes between servers and browsers, it won't get flagged as untrusted, somehow unverified information. So this is what's going to allow us to import this stuff and use Bootstrap in our program. And that's it. Once we copy that in, we can start using Bootstrap's CSS. Now, Bootstrap also has JavaScript stuff. We're not going to use the JavaScript, but I'm going to show you where to put it because it's from the same place, just as a demonstration. I'm going to show there's a slight difference in where you put it. So we're going to copy this script tag back on the Bootstrap page, and it's down here. You'll notice right above the closing tag of the body. So we're going to put it in the same place in our HTML. Go right above the body tag, the body closing tag, right? So we got the slash body. We're going to paste that in. And similar as long, it's got the cross origin, it's got the integrity, it has the link, except this time it's called source instead of href because it's a script tag. It's slightly different. And we're going to do this ourselves when we put in our own JavaScript, but this is the convention for it in a script tag. You tell it what the source is, and here again, it's just a URL for that source. So now we have both JavaScript and CSS hooked up into our project from Bootstrap. So we could use all the components that are listed here and go wild and make our site look pretty, behave the way we want it to, according to our design. Again, according to the design that we came up before this. So right now, for kind of demonstrations on how this works, let's make our site look a little bit better. Again, reminder, this is nasty looking. Not just the color, but the layout is really old. These links kind of stupid looking up here in the nav bar. And it looks like a obviously very early site from like 1991 or something like that. So we're going to do a little bit to make it look cleaner. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change the background overall. We're going to stop using our custom class, and we'll use some classes that are built in to Bootstrap. And the way to do that is we just use BG to stand for background, and then we select a kind. And they've got all kinds of different ones. They got lights and darks and stuff like that. We're just going to do a dark background. Then we're going to make the text light colored. So you put multiple classes within the open and closing parentheses. And you can look these up in their documentation and decide which ones you want, again, according to your style. But that's it. Once we save this in here and refresh or reload our source code in our server, when a browser accesses it and sends a request into our server, this is our browser now, and we refresh this, it's going to go in and it's going to grab that stuff, and it should change the colors. And there we go. So now we have a slightly more pleasing background color It's not that disgusting green color anymore. And the text is white. But it looks like our buttons sort of disappeared. So these don't really stand out as well. We need to do some more things to make this look a little better still. But we can continue to use the built-in pieces without having to write our own custom CSS. So we could achieve all these things that we're going to do in Bootstrap with our own CSS, but it's just faster to leverage what they already have built. Now, if you remember from last time, I talked about how you could go on like any site you're on. We can even do it on this site. Right click and hit inspect. There are hotkeys depending on what computer you're on. And you can look at their, whatever site you're on, you can look at their HTML and CSS, and you can see all these things where they are and where they're set up. And you see very frequently, and I knew this was going to happen because, you know, I didn't check the site in particular, but I knew they're going to use them. If you see over here is div, D-I-V. It's a very, very, very common HTML tag. That stands for division, div. Now, what's a common approach is to use those things to group content together and then apply styles to that content. So we're going to do something kind of similar here to show a little how it works. Use a div tag, just one, to get it rolling. So we're going to type in div, and then we're going to set a class to it, and we'll use some of Bootstrap's built-in classes. And one class that's real common to use on the overall, all the stuff that you want inside the body page is just called a container. And this class is going to contain all of our content on the page and give us a little bit of a buffer between the whole body that's on the page and the raw body itself. And we could change some of the styles and do some of the things inside of it. And I'll show you what it does just automatically. First, we're going to make sure that we wrap all of our content in it, though. So this ending tag right here that's in line 12 right now, we're going to take that out. We're going to cut that. And I'm going to put it down here above my script tag. Doesn't really matter. You put it in the script tag. It doesn't make a difference. But this is a visual thing. The div is a visual breakup, so we want to keep our content that we're going to see inside of it. So we don't want to include the script. We're not using that in here. And so it's going to have our nav bar, and it's going to have our content, and everything's just going to be inside this container. And just for visual, so we're reading this, and this is what you're supposed to do in HTML is indent everything once it's nested inside of a new element. So I've added an element that our nav bars and our content is nested in. So I'm going to move this whole block of code over. The way I just did that, in case you're not familiar with, in most text editors, you can even do it in Google Docs now. When you highlight a whole bunch of text, the way I just did, highlight several rows, hold down Control, and then use your bracket keys, the opening and closing brackets, to just move that entire block over what amounts to a tabbed space, like 4 spaces over. So if you need to add indentation to several blocks, that's useful. All right, so we've wrapped what's called this all of our content inside of a div tag, and we can see that we could collapse this div tag and see that now none of our content is outside of it, is all inside of this thing. And what that's going to do when we save this and reload our server and look back at our site and reload the browser on that side, so it sends a new request to the server, gets the freshest source code that we have, it's going to push all this stuff off the edges of the screen and kind of contain it in the middle a little bit. And you saw when I did that, it pushed, it gave us this little gap between the capital T and the far right. And if I inspect this page once again, and we can see the elements that are in here. So now we have our H1 element where this text is, and we have our buttons, and we have our nav element. But then we also have, there's the body element. Let's see if I can get a hold of the div. Here it is. So here's our container. Whoop. There. It'll be easier for me to highlight it this way. Okay, so here's our div container. And it's got some yellow stuff on the outside and then green stuff on the inside. And then there's the blue section. And if you forget what all those parts are and what they mean, down here over on the right-hand side, it has an explanation. So that outer part is margin. And this, since we're looking at something, shows us specifically what the values of those things are. So the margin is everything outside of the border. There could be a border itself. This has no border that's visible. And padding is space that's inside the border of that element. So when we're looking at our div element that contains everything, it's got some padding in here, and it's got some more margin on the outside. And that's going to change depending on the screen size. So now we got some more margin, no padding at all, but you see that the content always kind of pushes towards the middle as I move this emulator screen size in and out. the values for the padding, you look over on the right-hand side, those are just going to change automatically. And these are the attributes of a container in Bootstrap. I didn't have to write all the CSS to make it do that. And if you look at this, the styles that are in here, look at all these styles. Look at all this stuff. I have to write any of this with its breakpoints and the font size. Just that's all built in. So this is the beauty of frameworks. So we get it to do something like this, make it look a little bit better automatically without doing a lot of work. So again, this is here. This little pop-up window shows the specifics, the values for the margin and padding. When it says 0 pixels, PX is what the pixel stands for. That's top and bottom, the first number, if there's just one number, and then the second number is right and left. You could explicitly write 4 numbers for top, bottom, left, and right, and put those values in if you wanted to. But that is an example of something that's really cool, a device that's used a lot for setting up your visual layouts is the div tag, and then again, a built-in class container that's just helpful. So we still have our problem though of the website not showing our buttons. We can't see these buttons unless we hover over them. Here I can get out of this and see right here. When we hover over them, they show up, but we can't see them. We can't see if there's a nav bar if we're not hovering over. So we got to fix that real quick. So let's use a couple more things that are built in to well, I mean, I should probably stop saying that since all the stuff we're doing here is going to be built into Bootstrap. That's the whole idea of the framework. So we're going to use some more built-in classes. Oh, whoa, excuse me. To change the background color and to make the nav bar itself look more like a nav bar. So there are several options and all kinds of ways to do this. I'm approaching this with a quote unquote mobile first philosophy, like we talked about last class, where you could either do large screens first, small screens first. The philosophy for this is mobile screens. So while we're testing this, again, I encourage you to do this when you're doing your own site. If you go to your URL on your phone, it'll work exactly the same way as on this page. And it's much better to look at that than when we did the emulator and make the screen size smaller, because the real mobile device will function a little bit differently. So when you're doing that, just as a note, keep that in mind. So the nav bar elements that I'm going to choose are ones that I think are going to look decent on a mobile screen. And they're going to make it more look like buttons that are kind of stacked up at the top of the page, and the text is going to be centered. So the way we do that is we just do nav bar. Whoop. So we have to put class first. So we say class, and we assign that again in the nav element that we already have. So we just give it these class names that are from Bootstrap that are built in. So we say navbar dash nav is the first one. And then we'll change the background color. Since we did our body was dark, we're going to change this to secondary is what we call it. It'll be a little bit lighter that way. And that way it should stand out on the page and not be as well blending in. So we'll save that. We'll reload our server. And then once that's done, we'll refresh our page. And now we have an actual navigation looking bar here at the top. And we can see these buttons. They still work how they did before. But you see when I click on them, the whole top part thing is highlighted because the button spans the entire div, most likely. It's inside of that div, so it's going to span that. But we can check that out and inspect it and see exactly where it is. Oh, let's get our selectors here. All right, so there's our button and there's our div. Yep, so you can see that the buttons are right up to the inside of that green part. So they're right up to the inside of the padding of the div. And if you remember, the padding is the stuff that's inside a border. We don't have a border value, so there's no border to see here. But the padding is everything that's inside the border. So it's the inside of the container that you're in, that these things are in. So the buttons go right up to the edge of that. And the H1 does too. It does all the way around. So again, you could change these if you wanted to make them smaller sizes or whatever the case may be. But as you can see, just by adding those two little things from Bootstrap, we cleaned up the site a lot, or I guess 3 things for Bootstrap. We changed our background color, added a class here. We added a div that's a container that pulls all of our information off the side and gives us this little gap margin on the sides of it automatically as the screen size changes and does different things. And then we made the nav bar look more like a nav bar by just adding classes. So that was much faster to do all those things that we just did using Bootstrap than it would have been if we had gone and written our CSS. But we could have done the exact same things in CSS. We could have written our custom classes, figure out what the hex value of this color was, manually write in the padding values, the breakpoints, and all that stuff that Bootstrap is doing. Or we could copy and paste this thing from Bootstrap and then just put these class names in here and we're good to go. And it starts rolling. So does that all make sense? I'm kind of fired through that, but it's pretty much an expansion on what we did before. And we're just adding class labels to things. Chris, you got any questions on that, man?
No, no, just trying to swallow as fast as the fire hose is spitting.
And if I'm going too fast, man, seriously, slow me down. I can go
No,
slower. If there's something
it's
that's
all good.
yeah, cool. So
Just catching up on the, just making sure the links are in here right. And
yeah. Yeah. All right. So then once we've got it like this is basically how we want our site to look in its most basic form. So we can start updating the information that's in here and make that look as this, this was just our placeholder to say that it was an index. So we could go save this since I made a couple more changes. So we could just hop over to our index page. We could change some of these things, an actual welcome, like welcome, spell welcome right to my site, welcoming folks. Maybe just some information like this is my website. Enjoy. And then the same principles that we had before of making something look pretty by just grabbing stuff online. We can now embed kind of whatever we want to, right? So if you want to grab something that's just a little bit flashy, like a video or a GIF, like from this page, Giphy, which is really fun. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in there. Anything that's got this embed thing on there, we can now just click on that embed. So find some content you like online. And responsive, we want to click responsive on this one because, we like things to be responsive. That's when screen size changes and things like that. And we'll see it'll give us this code with a div element inside of it. So all we're going to do is copy this code and we can add this as well, just straight into our HTML. And now it's got, an href, and we're familiar with what these things are now. These are all elements that we know. We can see what they are. It's got some style written directly in it, like we had before when we are doing an HTML. So this comes with its own custom styling to make sure it fits in how you want to. You could take that out. You could remove it. But again, you can just drop these things into your site now because it's all now hooked up. So you can go and you could grab not just from official frameworks, but you can grab video clips or any of those sorts of things. And if it has an embed button on there, it'll give you this piece of code that you can grab and use. And now update, and it'll have, even more information on there. It'll look even better. And then you can customize these things. Like if I don't want to have this little link in here to go back to Giphy, then I can find my link in here that I had copied. Say, okay, it was this little A tag that says, where did you go? Here we are. So it's this little A tag that says via Giphy. And I can just take that and remove it if I don't like it. Save that, run it out. And now we have the framework set up and our site looks a little bit better to where we can kind of do whatever we like to it, customize it, grab content from other places, build our site. And the front end is going to look a lot slicker, a lot faster than if we write our custom CSS and do all those sorts of direct things. All right. So again, very simple stuff with the finding content and copying and placing it into our site. Now that we have the framework built up, we can take this, and what I really want you, Chris, and anyone that's watching this later to do between now and next Tuesday is just mess around with this, mess around with the colors and make it yours. Make put the navigation bar some other place or a different style or whatever you want to do. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine. Now that you've got the parts and pieces able to make a site look how you want it to look. So, barring any questions on that, you got any questions on that, Chris, before we move on?
no, I do not.
Okay, cool. So the next thing that we want to do was use JavaScript a little bit and make things dynamic. So our site still is static. There's nothing about this. We go to the about page. It's just a page. And even with this GIF on there with the twinkling lights and stuff, this is a static page. There's no user interactions that are really happening. And we're not going to get deep with the user interactions because once again, we don't have our backend built for the to-do list app. But what we can do is put in a little warning message for folks to confirm that they want to delete a to-do list item. And we're going to do that in JavaScript, and we can do that now since that's a front end thing. So we're going to go back to our base HTML, and we're going to just write some JavaScript right in here. So we already imported the Bootstrap JavaScript, and these components that we're going to build directly, again, you could find them in Bootstrap and you could plug them in similarly to what we've done with the CSS. But we're going to go through the steps of building JavaScript from scratch, just like we did with CSS, and then refactor it out into its own place to demonstrate how that's done. A lot of times you won't want to mess with looking stuff up in a full-on framework. You'll just write a quick script to do something. And this doesn't apply just to JavaScript also. So with Python, a lot of times, like for our site, we have a lot of our Python scripts that are doing the machine learning and the natural language processing and those sorts of things. Those are Python scripts that are going to be, they live in the same sorts of places that we're going to set this JavaScript up in when we refactor this by the end. So they sit in the script folders, and we import them with collect static, like Chris and I were discussing in the beginning of class, but they're JavaScript or Python, and they could be both. You could have all those things in script folders and use both JavaScript and Python. It's going to be the same mechanics as what we do here. But again, we're going to use JavaScript as the example because it's the internet standard. You're not going to get away from it entirely if you do anything web development. And if you dive into deep web development and you decide that's what you really want to do, you're probably going to move away from Python and do all the stuff that we did, including the backend stuff, directly in JavaScript. So that's just the option. But let's get started on this. So what we're going to do first is underneath the script tag where we copied and pasted from Bootstrap, we're going to add another script tag. Except this time it's going to be our empty own script. And we're just going to write our own script for it, and we'll write JavaScript from scratch. So let's go through this. It won't be real complex. It's going to be a lot of the same stuff that we know from Python, just written slightly differently. So the first thing we're going to do, well, before we get going, let's kind of vision what it is that we want to do and kind of plan this out. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to have a way for this button when it's clicked. Imagine a user on our homepage clicking a button, and we know it's going to be a delete task button, but we don't want that delete to happen right away when they press the button. We want to somehow stop the default behavior of the button and give the user a confirmation page that says, hey, are you sure you want to do that action that this button does? And make them say, yes, I do want to do that thing. And once they say yes, we'll complete that action, send the action on and say, yeah, okay, go ahead and complete that action. If they say no, then we want it to just stop and not do anything. So that's generally what we want our function to do. So let's start out by writing that function. And in JavaScript, the way you write a function is you write the word function first. You very explicitly decide to write out the whole word, and then you name that function. So the way we did it with Python, we did def, and then we named the name. JavaScript, you write function and then the name. So we're going to call this function confirm delete. And we use camel case. That's, again, way more of a standard in JavaScript where it's the second letter or the second word is capitalized. They don't do as many of the underscores like we do in Python. So we say confirm delete, and this is going to take in similar fashion as before, an event. So open parentheses and then type event, close parentheses. Now, JavaScript functions work with curly brackets. So this is one of the first times that we're going to see JavaScript differing from Python, and then it's got more brackets and stuff to worry about. So inside of our curly brackets is where the function is going to live, the meat of the function, the operations. So the first thing we want to do is with this event that comes in, and again, in our context, we're going to be talking about a click event, but this could be any event at this point. For JavaScript, this could be a touchscreen event. This could be a microphone. It's just generic event right now. What we're going to do is we're going to tell it to take the event and prevent it from doing what it normally would do. So we're going to say event dot, and then the built-in prevent default, which is in, you got to spell default right, built into JavaScript. So we say event dot prevent default, and it's going to stop it from doing its default behavior. And then we close each line of JavaScript with a semicolon. It's important to remember. Again, more stuff than in Python. All right, so now we've stopped the default buttons. They've clicked the delete button. It's not deleting. It's not doing anything. It's saying, nope, we have prevented that. What we want to do now is we want to confirm with the user that they do in fact want to do that. So we're going to use an if condition similar to what we've seen in Python, except this time we're going to have to use parentheses to put our condition inside of it. And we're going to use a built-in confirm command, right? So we say if, and we say confirm, and this is going to automatically, all this code is written already in JavaScript for what confirm does, but it's going to take like a little pop-up window, kind of alert window at the top, and it's going to have an OK and a cancel button built into it, and it's going to say that your website says, and then it'll say whatever you tell it to say. So you have to pass it a string as a message. And since we're talking about deleting tasks, we could do delete task. We could say, are you sure you want to delete the task? You could say, you know, what's your problem? What are you doing? Anything you want to that's a string, you could put this in here and it's going to pop up on the user's window when they hit that delete button. And it's going to ask them to hit either OK or cancel. And that's, again, that's all built into this confirm. We don't have to specify any of that pop-up window noise, none of that. But now we have to get into this if conditional block. So similarly to the function, we're going to do it with curly brackets. So now we have another set of curly brackets. So JavaScript for you once again. So this is the condition that if they do click OK, they click OK, they do want to delete this task. We then want to release that default behavior back into what it was doing. So what we're going to do is grab some more things that are built into JavaScript to interact with web pages. We're going to take window.location.href. Now this means just the window that you're in and the location and the link that it's going to go to next. That's kind of what this is setting. So we're not going to dive deep into what each of these pieces are. Definitely worth looking up if you want to dive deeper into JavaScript and how it interacts with things online. But we're going to set this. We're going to say that it is the same as the event, which we were using before, dot target href. So whatever that button was going to do originally, we're now going to assign it to what is actually happening in the window. So we've confirmed with the user that they do want to delete the task. And with that confirmation, we're going to assign the original default behavior that we stopped back to what's actually happening in the window. So this is our core function of confirming that somebody wants to delete something. And that's our first function written in JavaScript. So it's not too different as you're looking at it from Python. There's a little bit more going on there. There are some more brackets and things happening, but the flow is fairly logical and it's fairly easy to follow, right? Don't you think, Chris? Is this, and this isn't your first time messing with JavaScript, right? You've seen some JavaScript already.
I've seen it. I've not really
Yeah.
had the opportunity to
Do
walk
much with
around
it.
with
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So yeah, it's really not that intimidating. It's, you know, if you've done any scripting, this is pretty similar. The way that it does some stuff is going to be a little different. And we'll get to some of that here. We have to loop through some stuff too. So now we have our function built. And this is, as we've said before, it's just a definition of a function. So it's not doing anything yet. The next thing that we're going to have to do is figure out which of our buttons are delete buttons. So we are going to have to do that in two ways. So first, we have to find all the buttons on our page that are delete buttons. We're going to use classes to do that. Now, remember, we can use IDs and we can use classes to identify things. And classes are used, remember from last time, when you're going to use that designation over and over again. So right here is an example, these two A tags, they're both buttons, and so they both have the class button. Now, ID is something, if you're only going to use it one time, you'll use an ID. So for us, we're going to have several to-do list tasks, and those tasks should all be able to be deleted. So we know we're going to need several of them. So we're going to use classes to identify these. And we're going to use some more stuff that's built into JavaScript to look at our document, find all the tags that are this class, and store them into a variable that we can then do things with further with our JavaScript. So we're going to do a variable just like we have in Python. It's somewhat different syntax though. So remember in Python, when we did a variable, we just wrote the name. In JavaScript, we have to be a little bit more explicit and use the reserved term var, V-A-R, short for variable. Then we can name our variable. So we're going to name this delete buttons because it's going to be a collection of all the buttons that are labeled delete on our page to differentiate them from the other buttons. Now, we're going to tell JavaScript to look at our document. This is a reserved word, and it's going to know that means our HTML document. So it's going to look for an HTML document. It's going to grab that document at the root of our project, or wherever we tell it to, with this case, the base.html, or any document that's loading through this base that extends it using Django's template language. So this is the document. It's going to look through all the elements on this document. When we tell it to do query selector, capital S, sorry, selector all. So this query selector all, it's all one word, but camel cased. So the first word is lowercase, second word is uppercase, third word is uppercase. And we're going to give it the name of the class that we wanted to find as a string. So remember when we did CSS, class definitions start with a period. So we're saying we want a class, and we'll just call this button. We call this anything. We call this anything we want to. We're going to call it button delete because it's a descriptive name of the class, and we know that that's what we want these buttons to be doing. And so when we're reading our HTML, we know that that is a delete button, even when we're reading it on our own. So then this piece of code here is going to take a look at the document. It's going to look for all the tags that have this class applied to it, and it's going to assign each of those into this, what's going to amount to be most likely an object in JavaScript, which is in JavaScript terms what we've been calling a dictionary in Python. That's what JavaScript calls those key value pairs. Call them objects, and a lot of things in JavaScript are objects. So we now have this collection, our delete buttons that are in there. Great. What we need to do now is we need to loop through that collection of things and tell it to that each basically set a binding of this function to those buttons, so that each time those buttons are pressed, the ones that are labeled as delete buttons that we've now collected here, each time those buttons are pressed, we want to do this check that we did before. We're preventing the behavior, confirming with the user, and then passing on the default behavior. So to do that, we're going to now do some operations on our delete buttons. What was with my spelling today? It's all over the place. All right, so delete buttons. And we're going to loop through this because it's a collection of things. So the way we do a for loop in Python is going to be different than how we're looping through these objects here. We use the built-in for each. And the syntax here, different as you could tell. We use the iterable that we're going to loop through at the beginning, and then we say dot, and then we attach the for each as the built-in looping mechanism in JavaScript. And so we're going to say each individual thing in this, we're going to do something. Now you could do all kinds of different stuff. We could dive directly into just doing whatever we like, but what's really common in JavaScript is to use what's called an anonymous function and run that function each time that you run through this list, right? So we do that by writing function, just like we did before, except now we're not going to give it a name. We're not going to give it any of this like we did up here, confirm delete. We're just going to give it whatever its input is. So this input, since it's going through a collection of buttons, is going to take a button. So each time it goes through, so for each button in buttons, do this function. Is what this piece of code is telling us to do. So now, since this is a function and we're in JavaScript, we have to do it in curly brackets. So I'm going to do my delete buttons dot for each camel cased. So each is capitalized, for is not. Open parentheses, function, another open parentheses with its expected input button, close parentheses, open curly brackets, and then we get to put in our code. And then after that, we got the closing curly brackets and closing parentheses for our for each loop. Right. So now inside of this function, it's not going to be complex. We're going to use some more built-in things to add what's called an event listener to all of the buttons that looks for a click specifically. So the specific event that we're looking for is somebody clicks that button. That's what we want it to do. So we're going to use the button that comes in. So this is where we're getting this from, is each button that's in this delete buttons list. We're going to take that button and we're going to do something with it. So we write button dot. I hope you're sensing a pattern here. This is kind of how JavaScript does things. It's a lot of the thing that you're working on, dot, and then some sort of command. So we're going to use the built-in add event listener. Again, camel cased. So as lowercase, event uppercase, listener is uppercase, all one word. And this is going to expect two kinds of parameters, or two parameters, actually. The first being what kind of event and we're going to pass that as a string. So we're going to tell it a click event, and that's just the name that it expects. There's other types of events that you could add this listener to, but we're going to do a click event. So we want people clicking the button. It's going to do a thing. And what thing do we want it to do? We're going to pass it a function that we defined. So this confirm delete function. We're just going to give it the name right here. And then it's in there. And we got to remember to put our semicolon, which I actually forgot up here on line 25. I don't know if that's actually the end of the world, but you know, it's good to put it in there. There too. Get them all over the place. So we are now set up to take in our buttons that have been designated as delete buttons. We're now adding so we're finding all of them on the page. We're going through our collection of them, no matter how many we have, 1 or more, 0 or more, makes no difference. For each one, we're going to take that button specifically. We're going to add an event listener. We'll tell that event listener to look for clicks, and then run our custom function, which is going to prevent the default behavior of that event, and then ask the user if it wants to actually do that thing. And then it'll pass that on and say, okay, yeah, cool, go do that thing. We are sure you want to do that. So now that we've written this JavaScript, all we have to do is apply this class to a button, and it should work. It should run this general scenario, even though we don't have our tasks set up to actually run on deleting them. We can run this on one of the buttons we already have. So we can just set this class on our about a tag. Just go. Haha. Don't need all that. Let's actually copy this before I start copying and pasting. How was that whole GIF thing again? I don't want to put a GIF in our A tag. So let's add this button delete class to our about link. So now if this works, we expect the behavior to be when we go to our site, we reload our server and get the source code into the server. And we go back to our browser and refresh the browser. It should generally look the same. It shouldn't have broken anything on the visual, but when I click the about link up here at the top, it should give me a little warning that says, hey, are you sure you want to do that? And it does. So this little thing pops up, says Hired Labs, pythonanywhere.com says delete task, and that's the message that we gave it. And we have cancel, and we have okay. And you can see I'm still on the homepage. So this is welcome to my site. It's my website. Enjoy. There's a GIF we're looking at. So it has prevented the default behavior. And when I click OK, it should take me to the About page. And it does. So now we're at the About page. Now that'll work each time I click this. So even if I click it now, it'll still give me this warning and it'll take me here even though I'm on the About page. And it doesn't work for the homepage button because we did not give it that button delete class. So the homepage still just takes us directly. The About page gives us this warning. So that, in a nutshell, is how JavaScript can make your site slightly more interactive. That's a really simple use case for it. It does a ton more than that. But that is one pretty common way to use it, and it's a pretty simple example of it. Chris, you got any questions about that?
No, not at this point.
Okay.
I got it. It's all working.
Yeah, it's all making sense how the flow of that
didn't break it.
Okay. All right. Great. Cool. So then from here, the simplest thing to do, I say simplest thing to do, there are a lot of simple things to do, but what we're going to do from here is just refactor this code like we've done before to where, and we do that because as your code base grows, as your project grows, it's going to get really confusing to write all the functionality that you want to in a script tag down here at the bottom. This arguably, again, is very, very reasonable to do for a project this size. And if this is the only JavaScript we have, which it is, there ultimately really is no need to move this into another file. You can just let it run like this and they'll be totally fine. But again, as projects get larger, you're going to want to move this out to something else. So we're going to go through a lot of the same steps that we did setting up our style sheet up here when we moved our CSS out, except we're going to move this JavaScript function into our to-do list application. And I'm going to open up our file structure again to look at where that is generally. And the reason we want to do that is because this script doesn't interact with anything outside of that. It's going to be used only for deleting our to-do list items. So it's going to be a script that we use for this one. So we're going to want to put it in here in a static folder in this subdirectory, in this to do directory, so that it's easier to maintain. We know where to find it and we know where to look for it. Chris, this kind of goes to your question earlier of why not just put everything in the static directory. We're going to make another static directory that's specific to this application. So to do that, again, we can go manually set these things up in our GUI here, but I think it's a lot faster just to type the commands in Linux. So I'm going to type the commands in Linux. They're in the documentation. If you just want to copy and paste them, that's also totally viable option. That works really well too. But we're just going to make some directories. So we're going to do mkdir, and we're going to make a subfolder in to do called static. It doesn't exist, so we can't tab complete. And then we're going to make another subfolder after that's made in the static folder called scripts. This is where we're going to keep all of our different bits of whatever they are. JavaScript, could be Python, doesn't matter. We're going to put all of our scripts in here as the project grows. And then once that command is complete, I'm going to use 2 ampersands. So say run this command and then run another command, and another command is going to be touch. So I'm going to create our JavaScript file directly in that directory that we just made. So I have to give the full path to it. And again, I can't use much tab complete here since these things do not exist yet. So I'm going to put in the to-do static scripts directory, and I'm just going to call this confirm delete.js so we know exactly what it is that we're looking at, exactly what we're talking about. So when I hit enter on this, it's going to make these 2 directories, and it's going to make the file inside of it, and it's that fast. So it's a lot faster than doing it through the GUI, but again, you could do it manually through the GUI if you like. Let's clear this up, and now we can see, I'll just hit the up arrow to get back to my tree command and pull this up again so I don't have to write it from scratch. And we can just confirm that it did, in fact, make our static subdirectory in the to-do application with the scripts subdirectory and the confirm delete JavaScript file inside of it. So now that we got that, it's really just a simple matter of, I'm going to open up that file in another tab real quick, and all we're going to do is copy and paste our JavaScript from our base HTML tag in here, the script tag. I'm going to take all this JavaScript that's in here. I'm just going to cut it out of there, Control X, and I'm just going to paste it in here. And the format comes out a little wonky, so I'm going to fix the formatting. But this is less important in JavaScript than it is in Python. You're not going to break it. Again, this gets compiled down to a single line when it at runtime. It's going to compile this all down to one line. So those spacings and tabs and all that stuff, it's not going to break it like it did in Python, which is somewhat nice. It's an arguably nice feature of JavaScript coming this direction from it. You have to deal with more of the brackets and braces, but you don't have to deal with tabs being an issue. This is more for readability, so we can come back and read and maintain this, and it's just easier to read, and we see that the code blocks are logically indented into how they work. So not as strict as Python, but just by convention, it's nicer to keep it that way. So then once we save this, it'll be ready to go. We don't have to do anything else in this JavaScript. It's already written and we're solid. We have to do a couple more changes here to get our tag to import the way it's supposed to. And similar to what we did with our Bootstrap script, we're going to do that same thing, except now we're just going to add to our script tag that exists that we just moved it out. We're going to add the source to where the location is now, right? So we can close this tag up. So we're not going to have anything in the middle of it, but we still need the closing tag. And we're going to, similar to what we have up here, we're going to add our source and our type and all that sort of thing. So we're going to start off with type, just say what it is. And this is text / JavaScript, just like we did up here when we said that our type was CSS and we were telling a style sheet. And then similar to what we did up here, we're going to have this href that's going to be referencing the same kind of thing that this did here to get to the style sheet. And it's going to say, it says styles and then just the name of the thing. We're going to use the same structure for our source. in a script tag. Again, it's not an href, it's called a source, so src. But then we're going to use that same Django's template tags in here with the percentage signs and the curly brackets. And then inside the same call to static that we loaded up here on line 2 that tells us what our beginning of the URL is. So it's going to be that my site main static directory that's up there. And then in that, in single quotations, we're going to put the specific directory for that file. So if you remember, we made a scripts directory. So there's everything that's below static, right? So we do scripts and then the name. So confirm delete.js. It's also important to, like, as naming conventions, you notice that when I named the style sheet up here, CSS, I named it styles. And then I named this confirm delete, like what it does. So when I come back here and I'm not looking at that file and I'm not, I still have the tab open up here, but even if I had this tab closed and I couldn't remember what it's called, it's easier if you follow these conventions, so then you don't have to think back, like, what did I call that script? Don't call your scripts like code names or something, aardvark or something like that. Do something descriptive that's going to say what that function is so that you can actually reference it later without having to look it up. Excuse me. All right. So now that we've got this in there, we've connected all the parts and pieces. We've moved our JavaScript out into a separate file location. Let's save this. Two last things we got to do before we make this totally work. First thing we got to do is another file configuration. So we've done most of our setup in settings to route all of our static files and directories. But the last thing we need to do, since we've now started using our to-do list app as a file structure, and we have things in there that we expect it to find, we have to go back into our settings, and each time that we create a new app, we have to add it to our installed apps list. I didn't do this in the very beginning because this isn't like a default beginning of the project thing. This is something you do every time you add an application, and you may add several applications throughout a Django project. So this is something that's, each time you make a new application or grab an application from the Django environment that someone else has made, to get it to work properly, you're going to have to include it on this list. Now, the way that we include it on this list is we add it in as a string, and we're going to do the name of our application, which in this case is to do, and then we type in apps. So to do.apps. And then the convention here is it's really just importing a class from the apps page. Now I'm going to show you. We actually skipped this before when we set up the thing because it was an irrelevant file at the time, but now we're talking about, I'll show you what this file is. So let's go and have a look at what the apps file is and what it contains. So I'm just going to go into my site, to do, and inside of that, there should be these apps.py file. We can open up this file and look to see what's inside of it. So what it's doing is it's taking in some built-in stuff, this app config class. We recognize it's a class because it's capitalized, and in Python, we know that capitalized first things are classes. And then it has a class definition here itself of to-do config. And this is a convention that when you pass a application name to Django when it first starts, we did that start app command very beginning in week 2. It makes this class, it gives it this attribute of the name that you pass it, and it sets this auto field. You can look up what these things do specifically, but this is how the configuration for this application is handled in the backend by Django. And all we need to do is make sure that we tell the settings to include this class from this app file, and it'll then use all of our directories in that to-do directory, all the subdirectories and files and everything that's in there. It'll look for those things there and use them there. So again, in installed apps, we add a string that says the name of our app, so to-do.apps, and then the name of that class from the apps page, which is going to be the uppercase name of your app, so uppercase to-do, and then uppercase config. And that is the standard. So this is how every app will be added into Django as you make new apps. You add it to your installed apps list. Now, we can do our last step, which is the one that, Chris, you started off asking the question about. We're going to go over to collect static, and we're going to go over to our bash console, and we're going to collect the statics. Now, we've created a new static directory inside of our, here it is, still up, inside of our to-do application directory. And now we could go there and maintain it because it's the functionality that's specific for that application. But to get it to run in production, we need it to be in our static main directory because that's where Django is going to look for it when it's time to run at runtime and in production and ready to rock. So to get that going, let's clear this up a little bit. We're going to do Python 3, well, lowercase space manage. We use tab complete manage.py and then collect static. And this should again give us the warning, say, hey, we're going to overwrite whatever's in this file. Is that what you want to do? We're going to say yes. And it should copy one static file, which should be our JavaScript file in there. And it'll copy the directories containing it with the script directory. Let's clear this up and run our tree command one more time just to have a look and confirm that it actually did that. So now we can see that in our static main, we have our scripts, our confirm delete .js is in there. And so now, since we've refactored our code, we don't expect there to be any difference in how it operated before. We still have our class designation here on our A tag for the about link. I'm going to reload the server, put all of our source code that we just changed, all the settings and the new file structure and all that's going to be pushed up to our server so that when we go to our browser and refresh that, it gets the latest code. This should operate exactly how it did. When I hit this about button, it should give me that same pop-up window with the OK and cancel. And it does. So nothing's broken. Still works the way it did. So our refactoring is successful. We're able to move back and forth just like we did before. Our home button works with no confirmations, and our about button works with confirmations. So we have now finished making our site look a little prettier. So it's got some sort of polished up front end. It's not just our quickly hacked together CSS. And we did that a lot faster than if we wrote the CSS by ourselves by hooking up a front end framework. Bootstrap is again an older framework, but it's still viable, still useful. There are some sites that use it out there. Definitely worth your time to learn. And it's very quick and easy for smaller, shorter projects as you're getting going. And then we also implemented a confirmation for deleting our tasks, which we're going to use next week when we actually build the back end of our to-do application. So, Chris, an army of one online. You got any questions about any of the things that we did today? That's all the stuff that I wanted to cover today.
No, I've just got a little bit of catching up on with the documentation and
Okay.
yeah, I think I'm close. It
All right.
didn't work. It didn't follow. The button click didn't follow me, so I messed something up. I misspelled something, I'm sure.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to try? You want to try debugging it now? We got the time. We could try debugging
I
together. I can stop sharing
think
my
it,
screen. You can share yours if you like.
I think it goes back to the fact that I called my app to-do list instead of to do. So your example was to do, and I think it's just that I have to steer it back to the
Probably.
right thing.
Yeah, make sure that in your
So
settings, in particular, that this will be your to-do list name. So, like again, I was highlighting that whatever you named your app is
yeah,
going to be these places are going to be where that is. So if the JavaScript worked when it was in HTML, and then it didn't work to run it through the different static location, a couple of ways you could tell. I guess the first one is when you run collect static, if it says 0 files copied and you know there should be 1 copied, then
yeah.
you should then if is that what happened to you?
No, but it did go into a loop, and instead it
Ah,
closed the console because it was interfering with other users or some such like that.
interesting. Yeah, so I would check your installed apps configuration. That could be it. That could be the problem. Um, if you